And welcome to another edition of the Kaufman Corner podcast. Rany Jazayerli, Soren Petro with you. And while the Royals have done virtually nothing when it comes to the winter meeting so far, that's not going to stop us from breaking it down and analyzing. Nobody analyzes nothing like the Kaufman Corner podcast does. Well, I don't know. We'll dig into it. We've got some ideas, some thoughts on where the Royals should be going here in the winter meetings. They have made a couple of moves. We'll break it down. The 40-man roster is full. Yay, I guess, with the Rule 5 draft around the corner. I don't know. We'll talk about that. Tyler Gentry and Will Klein were added. How important is this draft lottery going to be for the Kansas City Royals? Should they take anyone in the Rule 5? What should they be doing in this winter meetings? Garrett Hampson's a Royal. Did you even know who he was before he became a Royal? And Joe Dillon is going to help with the hitting coaches. We're going to take a shot at who we think can make the biggest jump for the Kansas City Royals. It's all coming up right now on the Kaufman Corner.
You're listening to Kaufman Corner, the most in-depth analysis of the Kansas City Royals, breaking down the Royals like no one else can. Kaufman Corner is hosted by Rany Jazayerli and Soren Petro. Rany is a co-founder of Baseball Prospectus, author of Rany on the Royals, and former columnist for Grantland, The Ringer, and The Athletic. Soren is the award-winning afternoon drive host of the program on Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City. Kaufman Corner is proudly brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete, Kansas City's nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear since 1994. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, and every project comes with a written warranty. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, one contractor, all things parking lot. Now, here's your hosts, Rany Jazayerli and Soren Petro.
Thank you, Curtis. We are off and running here on the Kaufman Corner podcast. Back at it here on a Monday. We're a little late. This one's my fault. I was traveling. The joy of watching a god-awful football game in Green Bay, Wisconsin. That pleasure was all mine, I guess I will say. So we're late by a day. We thank you for joining us. Remember, we are usually live on Sunday nights at 10. We come to you on Monday. Sometimes we do bounce to a Monday. This is one of those sometimes. And so we appreciate everybody joining in. Remember, you can be a part of the conversation. We can see you in the chat room. All the means of communication, Facebook, Twitch, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn. We stream live on that. So if you're catching us via the audio podcast, you can be a part of the conversation on the video podcast. Rany, the winter meetings are off with a bang, I guess.
I'll have to take your word for it, Soren. I keep reloading Twitter/X, waiting to hoping that we would have something tangible to talk about with the Royals before we went on the air. There is word out there that Eric Fetty is getting very close to signing with a mystery team, and I find myself hoping against hope that the Royals are that mystery team. The Royals are never the mystery team, but as you remember, he was one of the 3 players on my wish list for the Royals. The numbers, 2-year contract for a little over $5 million is exactly where the Royals could afford him. So naturally, I have absolutely zero expectation. It is actually the Royals, but who knows? If in the comment section, if you guys get any news during the show, let us know, because God knows we'd love to have something actually live and interesting to talk about with the Royals.
Yeah, we're Rany literally like an hour ago. I'm still holding out hope that we're going to have breaking news from the Royals. And I'm like, I think you need to give up on that. I don't see that one coming.
It's the winter meetings. What is the point of the winter meetings if not to make transactions? I thought we were a transactional ball club now. Come on, guys.
Well, let's start right there. How concerned? I mean, we're somewhat tongue in cheek, but like, when do you get concerned if they haven't done something?
The flavor of every winter meetings is different. Some winter meetings, like, very little seems to happen, both in terms of trades and free agent signings. And, they pack up shop and go home, and everyone's like, well, they laid the groundwork for more moves to be made over the winter. And then there are some winter meetings, if Shohei Ohtani tomorrow morning announces he's signing for $500 million somewhere, and then suddenly the free agents come flying off the rack fast and furious. Every year is different. So right now, the Monday night when the winter meetings, when almost nothing's happened for any team, I'm not really worried. This is, as we've talked about, this is not a strong free agent market, and I think that's probably going to slow things down a little bit.
Yeah.
But we're not asking the Royals to make an enormous splash yet. We're just asking them to be interesting.
Well, listen. What do you make of what they have done? You want to start there, or do you want to start with what they need to get done?
Well, let's start with what they have done, because that won't take us very long. They've made, as far as I can tell, they've made one actual transaction here in the last couple of weeks, signing the legendary Garrett Hampson to a 1-year, $2 million contract. I got to tell you, Soren,
that is Hampson.
Hampson.
Because if you're going Hanson, no, it's Hampson.
Hampson.
Right?
Garrett Hampson.
Important distinction to make there.
And I must admit, completely out of character for the Royals to sign a scrappy utility infielder / outfielder with very little power but can run like the wind. This is completely wait a minute. This is exactly what they always do. They sign a very low risk but low reward signing. And the fact that he spent almost his entire career as a Rocky just seems to be kind of perfect. That he's, we don't even know if he can hit or not, because he spent almost his entire career hitting at altitude.
But he hit better this year, not at altitude.
He did, and he got on base. I mean, I will.
Don't pay no attention to the 379 batting average on balls in play. That is completely unsustainable. Pay no attention to that.
No, I will say he did also have the highest walk rate of his career this year, and a 349 on base percentage, despite, like you said, moving from Colorado to Miami. And the Royals at least made a note of the fact that he had a 349 OBP. If he has a 349 OBP for the Royals next year, that right there, if I knew nothing else about a guy with a 349 OBP, positional versatility, and speed, he'll be worth a 1-year, $2 million contract as a utility player, almost knowing nothing else about him. So I will at least acknowledge that if he can get on base, that he has a role on a major league roster. And the price they're paying him is not expected to be anything more than a guy off the bench. That's fine. Doesn't move the needle, but it doesn't necessarily hurt. My bigger question, though, is simply, what does he do for this team that 3 or 4 other guys already on their 40-man roster can't already do? I mean, is he better than? I don't think he's better than Nick Lofton to be on the roster for next year. If you're not going to use him as an infielder, I don't think he's better than Dairon Blanco if he's going to be purely an outfielder. Like, Dairon Blanco, to me, feels like a better use of a bench spot if you're just talking about outfield play. Is he better than Sumit Taylor? Probably. But again, it's like you've got all these other guys on the 40-man roster. The 40-man roster is full. So I'm still kind of waiting. I'm waiting for another shoe to drop. I'm hoping that this indicates the Royals are going to make a move with one of their infielders, because they don't have the space for Bobby Witt, Maikel Garcia, Michael Massey, Nick Lofton, and Garrett Hampson. There's just not enough spots on the 26-man roster. So if this means there's a trade afoot for whether it's Lofton or Massey, most likely one of those two, then this move would make a lot more sense. But I always worry when you make the small move, anticipating the larger move, because then either larger move doesn't happen and then you're stuck, or you feel the pressure to make a larger move that perhaps isn't ideal because you've already committed to the smaller move. Like, I don't know why you wouldn't make the big move, the trade, and then you can go back. There's going to be another Garrett Hampson out there if you miss the boat on this one.
You buried the lead a little bit for me, and that's, you got to it there. I think that's, if you're a Royals fan, you want to be optimistic, you want to be positive this time of year. What you're positive about right now is the fact that this would seem to be setting up the next move. Right? Like, this seems to me,
I hope so.
Is this a Michael Garcia? Because if we talk about going and making a trade of substance, you're going to have to give something up. And about the only thing they have that has value are they're, like, to me, that you can trade, where you have ready replacements, are at catcher and at shortstop. Not now, it's either Bobby Wood Jr. and a mega blockbuster deal, which I don't think anybody thinks they're going to do. So that would mean Michael Garcia to a team that values him more as a shortstop than you think you can get from him as a third baseman. you've made it very clear you're very high on him and what he can do for the team as a third baseman, and certainly gives him great defense. And he's having a great winter ball again, tearing the cover off the ball down in, where is he playing? In
I want to say Venezuela, but I could be
yeah, that's it. I can't even. I forgot where he's playing, but anyway, he's doing great. Batting over 500 and doubles and triples, and getting on base. It looks great. To me, that's what. Or Michael Massey goes as part of a bigger deal. I've seen some of the different people trying to put together trades, and Massey with Salvi, or is it Garcia with Salvi for some kind of really blockbuster trade? I don't know. And I don't know how much either one of those guys brings. I don't know that you can get a blockbuster. What is Salvador Perez with that price tag at his age? And what is Michael Garcia, who has virtually no power whatsoever? How much trade value and wasn't, doesn't come as like the, blue chip, this guy's been top 100 since, for the last 3 years as he rose up the minor leagues. So I don't know, but I that to me is what I like is one. Let me go over a couple things I like about this. He gets on base. We bitch about them not getting guys that get on base.
He got on base this year. Let's
Yes.
not point out the 3 years before that in Colorado, his OBP never got above 290. So at least they acknowledged that was one of the things they were looking at, but it's a 1-year trend only. I just want to point that out.
That is a very fair assessment on your point. 305 career on base at 28 years old. And what you hope is that a light went on when he got out of Colorado and quit trying to hit the ball over the wall, and he's more to where he is. But
Colorado is a weird environment, right? Because it's such a great hitter's environment, and the first 10, 15 years that the Rockies played in Colorado, we always expected players when they left Colorado, you would look at what their home and road splits were there, and you'd be like, well, if they hit like they did on the road when they were in Colorado, they're going to be terrible. And yet so many players left Colorado and their numbers didn't dip that much. And so there definitely is either an effect where playing Colorado, it's so hard to adjust to being on the road that you're actually a better hitter than you show based on your road numbers, or you get into bad habits, like you're saying. So the fact that he had actually bad numbers playing in Colorado, but good numbers one season in Miami, I'm actually, like you said, hopefully reasonably optimistic that those Colorado numbers are kind of affected by trying to be a kind of hitter he wasn't meant to be when he played there. And that even though it was only, 200 plate appearances or whatever in Miami, that might be a closer approximation of who he is as a player than what we saw in Colorado.
Yeah. So I do so that's one.
Mm-hmm.
He can defend, right? He can play a lot of positions, which is the way they do things in Tampa. So, listen, he looks like what a Tampa Bay Rays player looks like, right? So I'm okay with that, right? But the big picture is this setting up another move? Is this setting up something bigger that's out there? And I think that's one of the real questions. And I think that's your hope, is that they're now getting some depth, and it enables them to make a bigger deal someplace else. That's my biggest problem.
He is a major league caliber player. I mean, he's a player that is worthy of a 26-man roster spot and could potentially be on a good team. Like the things that he does, a good team. You think about like the Braves trading for Nicky Lopez, midseason or whatever. Like, he's of that caliber player where even a contender could use a Garrett Hampson on their roster. Guy who can run, play multiple positions, can get on base a little bit, and he's a 1-year commitment. He's a free agent regardless, so you're only getting for 1 year, but it's 1 year, $2 million. I mean, the major league minimum salary is about $720,000. So the marginal cost is like $1.3 million over just carrying a rookie. So the cost is minimal. It's really about opportunity cost for the Royals. Is he taking the spot of somebody that would be better? If they don't make a trade, I would argue that yes, there is an opportunity cost. So I'm hoping that the excess talent that they have here.
But isn't there only there's only an opportunity cost if it's somebody that is going to be better than him? And are you that high on Nick Lofton, on Smod Taylor, to where otherwise you're just suppressing their service time? And
Smod Taylor, no. Nick Lofton at this point, I would rather if the Royals don't trade any of these guys on their roster, I would much rather give Nick Lofton 200 or 300 plate appearances to see what he is than Garrett Hampson. So that would be my concern. Like
Okay.
the move in isolation is fine. It makes a lot more sense if they're actually going to be making some other changes to the proposed 26-man roster for next season. And I still hopefully will. It just seems strange to make this move without having that, because whatever that move is going to be a bigger transaction. It's going to be a trade, and you're going to be trading talent for talent. That's going to be, to me, a lot more important for the long-term future of the Kansas City Royals than a one-year deal for a utility guy.
I think we can conclude, because one of the things we talked about, one of the things we put on the podcast was what should they do? One of the things is now they have to move somebody, right? Otherwise, this doesn't make sense. Otherwise, you're just acquiring pieces and not building a team. And this team has been the island of misfit toys for too long. It needs to be a team. And this move in and of itself, by itself, does not make them more of a team. It just starts to create more log jams and more guys that look the same. So something else has to be coming for this one to make sense. By the way, the Kaufman Corner podcast proudly brought to you by our friends at Gann Asphalt and Concrete. Get your parking lot taken care of with the best in the business. They've been making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994, going on 30 years as they have taken care of any and all parking lot problems. One contractor, all things parking lots, with free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, and every project coming with a written warranty. Gann Asphalt and Concrete can take care of your first impression for your clients, for your customers, making sure that parking lot is brightly striped, also allowing you to focus on your business and not worry about liability problems out in that parking lot. Find Gann Asphalt and Concrete right now at GannAsphalt.com. All right, so now here ended the lesson of what they've done, right? We're now ready to move forward.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes.
So I do want to, I guess maybe let's put in the fact that they added Tyler Gentry and Will Klein.
They made two guys they added to the 40-man roster.
And I want to highlight this because I think this is important. One, Randy said 40-man is full, no room for a Rule 5. Technically, now, yes, that is the case. And then couple that with the line that said, this one from Mark, 106 loss team has no room on the 40-man for full ridiculousness. Say that out loud.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous when you consider this. As of yesterday, this is an article at MLB.com from yesterday, so it's possible some teams have made a few changes to their 40-man roster. There's only one other team in the major leagues that has
the same one
roster. You've got the same one.
Yep.
It's the Colorado Rockies. Mm-hmm. Who would pick third. The Royals, keep in mind, the Royals would pick second. There's no lottery for the Rule 5. They have the second pick in the Rule 5 draft, which is supposed to take place around 1 o'clock on the afternoon on Wednesday. They are forfeiting the opportunity to make a Rule 5 pick because they have a full 40-man roster. The only other team in the sport with a full 40-man roster is the Rockies. And you know what? If 28 teams are on one side of an issue and the Colorado Rockies are on the other side of the issue, you're probably better off being on the side that's not the Colorado Rockies. Like, just as a general rule of thumb, the fact that the Royals and the Rockies are together on this is sort of poetically perfect. But as a Royals fan, I don't like it. They have time to open up a spot, but they have about 36 hours to do so. And when you look at what's on the 40-man roster, I mean, the commenter is right. 106 loss team. You probably don't have 40 guys worthy of a 40-man roster spot. And I mean, you could talk about guys like, Jake Brent, Jonathan Bolin, Jonathan Heasley. These are guys that could be cut. But keep in mind, Josh Taylor and Taylor Clark, two relievers who are arbitration eligible. The Royals cut deals with both of them to keep them on the 40-man. Like, both of those guys look like very obvious DFA candidates a month ago. The Royals worked out a deal to keep both of them. And now they're not getting, perhaps as much as they would if they had gone to arbitration, but they're getting, I think one's getting like 1.3 million, the other's getting like 1.7. The Royals have made a conscious decision that they rather pay these guys above the major league minimum than let them go. And it's not clear to me that they're any better than replacement level and that they are worthy of being paid more than the major league minimum, let alone clogging up a 40-man roster spot at this point in the offseason. Because, I mean, they haven't even, they added Garrett Hampson. That also takes up a 40-man spot, but we still want them to sign like real free agents. They're going to have to cut some guys anyway. So the fact that they cannot find a way to open up a spot in ahead of the Rule 5 draft, yeah, the Rule 5 draft is risky, but like when you got the second pick and you've got a ton of open holes on your roster, I mean, Joaquin Soria, Brad Keller, like the Royals have done well in this regard. I'd like to keep their options open, at least one spot. So it is a little bit concerning to me.
I'm going to assume that they can shed somebody. Here's the question I would ask you. Is there always somebody as a 106 loss team with a farm system that's not ranked high? There's no way that you have 40 guys better than everybody out there, correct? As I see it, there should be no way, if for no other reason than, and I've read a bunch of the different names that people are kind of speculating that could be up there, a couple of injured guys, right? If you're going to go for Wright in a deal, then let's keep that train going. And let's go grab a couple more of those guys. Like, to me, I will say this. They're at 40. I don't care if they're at 40. Make a trade or cut a guy, whatever it is. I will be incredibly disappointed. I just don't believe that they're, out of all the teams that are winning teams that are doing things, that there is no one that's now available that isn't better than somebody on your 40-man roster. And and better than your 26-man roster, which is what they would have to be.
Right. I mean, that's the bigger thing. Obviously, the 40-man, the Rule 5 draft, it's not just somebody better than your 40. It's that good enough that they could stick for most of a season at the major league level. And look, there are some years where you look back and it's like, yeah, there was literally nobody drafted in the Rule 5 draft that year that was worthy of being picked. If the Royals have already done all their homework and consciously decided there's nobody out there that we want to take with that pick, okay, I mean, presumably that's what they must think. If they did, they would open up a spot. But is that a question of them not liking what's out there, or is that a case of them overrating their own guys? Because if there's one, sin that the Royals seem to commit over and over again, it's overrating their own players, right? Certainly during the Dayton Moore era, that was something that they did constantly. And even just yesterday, I think, or even was it earlier today on MLB Network, JJ Picola saying, we don't really believe we're a 106 loss team. Like, and okay, you have to say those things out loud. I get it, but it's like you are what your record says you are. Your roster lost 106 games last year. You do not have a well-regarded farm system. Like, be like honest with yourself and say, you know what, we don't have 40 players that are worthy of a spot. And so when you're cutting deals for Josh Taylor and Taylor Clark because you're too scared to go out and see what's out there in minor league free agency, let alone the Rule 5 draft, it makes me a little nervous that you are, still kind of in love with your guys a little bit too much and not, willing to address their flaws or acknowledge their flaws, really.
But he says there are at least 10 guys available in the Rule 5 draft that are better than Josh Taylor. I know they seem to have an affinity for Josh Taylor. They
traded Alberto Mondesi to get him, right? Yeah. And I mean, I hope it's not just that, we don't want to, give up, trade Alberto Mondesi and then release the guy we traded him for. But given that, I mean, they didn't lose that trade if the Red Sox never played Alberto Mondesi. So they can move on from Josh Taylor. And, I don't think anybody's going to look back at that trade in 5 years and mock them for it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but they did play better coming down the stretch. They did play better in September. Karen Kornacki, when they're like, well, we had a strong finish, we were like, Karen Kornacki, who's one of the nicest people you're going to find as far as, how she handles the teams and things like that, said, well, why should this spurt be, this good ending be considered any better than all the other ones you've had? This is what the Royals do. And so, listen, Bill Parcells said it a long time ago. You are what your record says you are. And that's what the Royals are. They're a 106 loss team. And there's no way. This is an exercise. I will tell you. And I defended JJ all last year. There's no way in year one you can be at a firing time. You just can't be. But now we're going into a second off season, and he's not looking to build an entire staff. I thought there would be more front office changes. We've seen some. We'll get to one here in a minute. Joe Dillon added as the assistant hitting coach. But, I'll be hugely, this will be the first big, I'll be like, this is a miss. There's no way you can have the second pick and there not be somebody that's better in your roster. This will be a really bad sign that the Royals can't be honest with themselves about who their players are if they don't take somebody in this.
Oh, and look again, if you are going to commit to being transactional, we use that word a lot, but you know what? It really is one of the fundamental changes they need to make. You cannot look at this roster the way it is now. You cannot look at this organization the way it's been since they won the World Series and conclude that we need to continue on the same course that we've been on.
Well, let's even say this. If you don't take somebody, you're saying that there are 20 pitchers on your 40-man roster, 20 that are better than anybody out there in the Rule 5. That's impossible. Like the better stuff, because isn't that what that's why Brian Sweeney's here, is
Right.
You go bring guys with stuff,
Right,
and
exactly.
he finishes them off.
Well, I mean, think
Cole
about it.
Reagans, which they did great with,
And-
right? Find that guy, and there's no way that the 20 best guys all happen to be on your roster.
Think about it. I mean, Reagan,
None
at
of
least
them
they
are
had to
available.
trade for. MacArthur was designated for assignment, and they very wisely was like, that guy who just got designated for assignment is better than, at least somebody on our 40-man roster. We're willing to give him a spot. And it worked brilliantly. And it's like, so now here we are. You have your pick of any player that's not on a 40-man, any eligible player not on a 40-man roster anywhere in baseball, and you don't want to take a chance. Like you and I are advocating this. In part, it is a reflection that we actually trust the Royals pitching development a little bit now, certainly compared to a year ago, right? Like you and I are saying this because we actually believe that the Royals might have an ability to take an unwanted or an overlooked diamond in the rough pitcher and turn him into something. Like we're giving them credit. If we didn't think they could make these guys better, then we're like, well, what's the point? The Royals aren't going to make them any better anyway. But no, they've shown that they can with Reagans and MacArthur. So why deprive yourself of that opportunity? It's just the mixed messages are just, it's like on the one hand, it's like, yeah, we're going to, bring in pitchers from outside the organization and we're going to coach them up. On the other hand, we're not going to give ourselves the opportunity to do it here because we don't have a roster spot. Like pick a lane.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So what do they got to get done? I mean, at some point we're going to say Bobby Witt Jr. a contract extension, right?
I mean, look, that is still our number one, really our number one dream for the offseason, but there's only so much control they have over that. And so it's to me, it's extra credit. It's a major extra credit project, but it's not, I can't make that a goal when even the Royals themselves can't make that a goal. I think this will get into one of the, the other questions we have, which is, you mentioned Maikel Garcia and somebody who's able to take a step forward. I'm actually starting to think that if the Royals can't, they can't force Bobby Witt to put his signature on a contract, I actually think where they could go is see if they can get Maikel Garcia to sign a long-term contract. And make it be, look, you want a PR boost. You want to show a commitment to your fan base, to the city, in light of the fact they're trying to get a stadium that you are willing to spend for the future. If you were to ask me what player I would have the most optimism and could develop into a star, right? If he takes a step forward, who could develop into a star in this organization? At this point, it's after Bobby Witt. After Bobby Witt, who's the most likely player in the organization to be an all-star caliber player in 2 years or 3 years? I actually think I would go with Maikel Garcia. Like Vinny Pasquantino is a safer bet to be an average, slightly above average player. The floor there is higher, but I actually think Maikel Garcia has higher star potential just because of his age, his position, his defense. And I think you can get I think you could put together a long-term deal for him. But I want to ask you something. Do you remember who's the last Royals player that they actually signed to, somebody in the organization, not a free agent, somebody they signed to a long-term extension? Do you remember who the last player was?
Was it Mike Sweeney? No, Whit Merrifield.
So it was Hunter Dozier, which I forgive you for forgetting about that because I wish I could forget about that too. I mean, technically, you could argue it's Salvador Perez, his second contract extension, right? But Hunter Dozier got the 4-year deal. Before him, it was Whit Merrifield. Those are, if you don't count Salvador because he was kind of already his second contract, and he was close to free agency, right? Before that, Danny Duffy signed a 5-year contract 1 year before he was a free agent, beginning of 2017. But he was 1 year away from free agency. So before that, you have to go back to Yordano Ventura, right at opening day 2015, before the Royals won the World Series. In other words, since the World Series championship, the Royals have given two of their young players a long-term contract extension. One of them was a head scratcher at the time and was a disaster shortly thereafter. Like Whit Merrifield is the only player. Now, that is mostly an indictment of their player development process. They just haven't had that many players worthy of it. All right. But we talk about how important it is for a small market team to develop young talent and cost certainty to sign guys to long-term deals. I mean, literally today, the Milwaukee Brewers just announced Jackson Churio, who's one of the 3 best prospects in the sport, 19 years old. He'll be 20 in March, and is probably major league ready right now as like an everyday center fielder. He just got an 8-year guaranteed $82 million, I believe was the number. He's got the team has club options for 2 more years, so they're going to keep him for a decade. He hasn't even made his major league debut yet. The Royals have had 2 contracts in the last, 8 seasons. Maybe it's time the Royals make that kind of commitment. And I think Michael Garcia, he's not a Bobby Witt. He didn't get $8 million in the draft. He, didn't go through the draft at all. He seems much more amenable to a contract that would guarantee him tens of millions of dollars. If we can't get Bobby Witt signed, maybe that becomes our top priority for the Royals is get Michael Garcia and maybe Vinny Pasquantino too. But let's get Michael Garcia signed to a long-term deal and build around him as well as Bobby Witt.
I think that's a great point. I will add, not necessarily do they have to get it done now, but the framework has to be laid and it has to get done before spring training. I can't watch all the catchers. I can't watch one of the catchers in the outfield. Like, trade somebody and fix it. Like, that has to happen. So whether it's that, they have to set the groundwork. Again, I don't want to say they have to get the deal done during the winter meetings, but they have to set the groundwork to making this team fit, right? Like, and that it goes back to the first part, but that has to happen. And it's going to be an absolute killer. How important is the lottery to this team?
It's important. I mean, unfortunately, it's not as important. Tomorrow's lottery, I think it's at like 4:30 in the afternoon. Tomorrow's lottery is not as important as last year's lottery was, unfortunately, because last year's lottery, there were 5, at the time it wasn't clear to be exactly 5 elite talents, but it was clear that there was some elite guys at the top of the draft. Next year's draft, really, I don't know if there's right now, today, I'm not sure there's one guy in next year's draft that would have gone in the top 5 of this year's draft. So that part of it is never, the timing sucks. But even if there isn't,
and the beauty of it is they'll be prohibited from being in the lottery next year, correct?
No, the way it works is if you're a rich team, if you're a team that pays into revenue sharing, you cannot get a top 6 pick in back-to-back years. So This coming year, actually, the Washington Nationals, they're the only big market team that got that qualified for the lottery that got one of the top 6 picks last year, or I guess this past June, and didn't make the playoffs this year because all the non-playoff teams technically qualify for the lottery to get a lottery pick, but you can't get a lottery picks 2 years in a row if you are a wealthy team. So the Nationals they can't even draft in the top 10. I think 10th is the highest they can draft. The Twins, who also got a top 6 pick, they made the playoffs, so they're not eligible anyway, but that would be another example. But a small market team can get a lottery pick 2 years in a row, not 3. Now the Royals didn't get a lottery pick last year, so
Yeah.
even if they get a top 6 pick tomorrow, they'll still be eligible for a top 6 pick next year. If they get that one, then they're not eligible a third year. But you can get one every other year indefinitely. Obviously, you'd rather make the playoffs and never have to worry about this in the first place. The MLB did a very poor job of explaining how this process worked. I know there's a lot of confusion, but that's how it works. So even if the Royals had gotten the first pick in this past draft, they would still be in tomorrow's lottery. So that's what sucks. It's not like you give up one to get the other. The Royals can do it 2 years in a row. But even if there isn't an elite guy out there, the advantage drafting higher is you get a lot more money to play with, right? It's not just about where you draft, it's that the draft slots determine how much money you can spend in the draft. And the difference between the first pick and the fifth pick this past year was like $4 million. So if there isn't an elite guy out there, then you cut a deal and then you can get multiple top 20 talents later with your later picks. So what's important to realize is even though the Royals had the second worst record in the game, the odds of getting the number one pick is about 18%. Number two pick 18%, and three pick 18%. So 55% chance they'll draft in the top 3, which means there's almost a 50-50 chance they will not have a top 3 pick next year. Like if I could lock in right now the number 3 pick in the draft for the Royals, I probably would take it right now, even though they finished second. It's not the new system is not good for the absolute worst teams. And that's frankly, I'm fine with that because there shouldn't be a lot of incentive to be really, really bad. If you're just an ordinary bad team, you might luck into getting the number 1 pick. But there's a very strong possibility the Royals will once again not draft in the top 5, next year. So, and again, the players available is less important to me than the money that they'll be able to spend. So, I mean, hopefully they get lucky. They need some luck, but on some level, you make your own luck. And the Royals, if they don't get a top 5 pick, they have no one to blame but themselves. That they need the top 5 pick so badly that it's like such a crucial part of the organization's future going forward.
Yeah. What do you make of Joe Dillon being hired as the assistant coach?
Well, my first reaction was that I'm old, because I remember when Joe Dillon was drafted by the Royals. I think it was their 7th pick in their 7th round pick in 96 or 97, and was like worked his way through the system, was a decent sort of utility guy coming through, and then I eventually made the majors with the Marlins and had some success. From the standpoint of what he does for the Royals now, I think just getting another voice from outside the organization that are not constantly just promoting from within, I think that's a good sign. They obviously have a philosophy of how they're trying to teach hitting now, that Alex Zumwalt has sort of put in place, but they have, other hitting coaches in the organization that they all want to be on the same page. So I don't know enough about Joe Dillon specifically to say, oh, this guy's perfect, but I like the fact that they're bringing in guys from outside the organization that may have learned other techniques. You constantly want to be on the cutting edge of what other organizations are doing. And so if you're not constantly, shuffling in new voices, I think you're going to fall behind. So from that perspective, I'm completely fine with it.
I like the fact that the coaching staff is expanding. So we've said it, the one thing that they can do, there's no cap on spending on coaches either. And if you can build a great coaching staff, then you're giving the guys you got on your team as much chance to succeed as possible. So yes, I'm glad to see that they are continuing to add to the organization. Right? I'd be disappointed if they weren't.
Right.
It would mean that they're like, oh no, we did our coaching staff, it's all set. No, you got to constantly be looking to add, and they've done that. I think that's a real positive, for me. So I did like this. I did like the fact that this was not. Again, it's not a big deal, but this is like what they need to be doing, right? And so this is just a matter of making good decisions and expanding the coaching staff. So I'm for that. I was pleased to see that. So I don't know what he's going to do with Tyler Gentry. Which, by the way, since Tyler Gentry and Will Klein were added to the 40-man roster, we expect both of them should be at the big leagues this year, correct?
I think it's at some point during the season. I mean, these are not 21-year-olds in A-ball who were signed out of Latin America when they're 17. They're eligible now. These guys like Tyler Gentry. It was a disappointment that he didn't take a step forward and make the major leagues this year. And Will Klein, if he could throw strikes, probably would have been in the major leagues this year as well. I mean, he was actually the Royals' sole representative at the Futures game. Right. And I think he was passed by John McMillan by the end of the year because John McMillan was actually throwing strikes and Will Klein still hasn't thrown strikes. So by putting him on the 40-man roster, the Royals are planting a flag and saying, we think this guy can develop major league command. I'm not certain of that, but the stuff is certain. Stuff will play. Tyler Gentry's, interesting because if he gets 10% better across the board, he's an everyday right fielder. Like he has that kind of prototypical, right fielder profile. You get hit in a best case scenario, hit 270 with 25 bombs and good plate discipline and a really strong arm. But he needs to get 10% better across the board. Otherwise, he's a 230 hitter with 15 home runs and he's useless. So I don't know what he's going to be. He had a very disappointing first half. He was much better in the second half and kind of put himself back on the map. I don't think he would have made the 40-man roster where he was in July. But yeah, another guy that the Royals, their hitting development needs to work with because I think he's 25, maybe even approaching 26 now. He's not young.
Now, he needs to be up. If you're going to put a 40-man roster spot on him, he has to play this year, which goes back to what we were talking about making the team fit and Hampson being signed and another outfielder, right? That's big. I mean, so like this, again, how are you going to make this all fit? Like the groundwork has to be laid here in the winter meetings. Let's highlight this one. Curtis Nelson said Preston Farr just tweeted, and of course, Preston is a writer for Royals Review. Preston Farr just tweeted the White Sox and Mets are reportedly the finalists for Eric Fetty. It doesn't sound like the Royals are in line.
Yeah, disappointing. Not surprising. It's disappointing in part because the price tag is exactly what I expected it to be, and I think exactly what should be the Royals' sweet spot for adding someone to their rotation. That's not their prime target. Like I still think, and the Royals have given us plenty of reason to think so, that they are going to spend some money in free, at least sign one, non-bar, basement barrel pitching, starting pitcher. I think something above the Jordan Lyles class is what they've hinted at. But this was a way to add a guy in the Jordan Lyles price tag range, even below that actually had some upside. So that's what's disappointing. It's one thing when the Royals, there are some free agents, many free agents out there that we just know the Royals are not going to compete for financially. But Eric Fetty it has nothing to do with money and everything to do with just creativity and risk tolerance to take a guy who was not great in the major leagues for several years, but was a well-regarded prospect once upon a time and went to Korea and completely remade himself. It's, weighing the risk and the reward. The Royals hopefully at least made that risk-reward calculation and decided that the risk wasn't worth the reward. My worry is that they just didn't give it enough consideration because they weren't creative enough to consider signing somebody from across the Pacific Rim. So it's business as usual, which is not always a good thing for the Royals.
Yeah, no, it's not. And, I think that's the frustrating part that's out there is that, you're like, okay, this is, but I will say this, the teams that are in the mix are teams that are going to spend money. So it makes you wonder, did the price start to get out of hand?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll see what the final price. It may end up being much more than we're hearing right now.
Yeah.
The Mets being in is interesting because the Mets can pay for anyone, but that also tells me, I mean, if the Mets price is not the object, so if they feel like he can actually contribute to their roster, then that says that it's not simply about a good pitcher for the price. If they think he's a good pitcher, period.
Yeah.
Which in itself is kind of eye-opening that, a team with the resources of the Mets would still be like, this guy, is one of our free agent targets for this winter.
And I always like a good line. And when Mark says, quote, if he could only throw strikes, a Kansas City Royals story tonight on A&E.
That story started in 1998 or so. It's amazing. I mean, the first 30 years of the Royals, they could throw strikes. They played great fundamental defense. They did all the right things. All this we made fun of the Royals now, but you and I are old enough to remember when like the Royals did all these things that they don't do anymore. And it's frustrating because I know that a different way is possible, but the
Yes.
market never did not prohibit them from doing that for the first 30 years.
All right, let's finish with this. Who is the one player that can take the biggest jump for the Royals that would make the biggest impact? That reasonably you could say, wow, this guy had a big, Cole Reagan's like jump, doesn't have to be a pitcher, but came from off the radar to being something that is like, wow, that's a building block.
Well, I mean, I kind of gave you the answer already with the Michael Garcia talk. I feel like Michael Garcia is the guy who could take a step forward. Like, there's a lot of guys who could take a step forwards and be useful, but like, we need stars. We need foundational pieces. Michael Garcia, to me, because everything is there, but the ability to hit the ball in the air, right? The contact, the exit velocity, like he hits the ball hard, he hits the ball often, he plays defense, he runs well. It's just he needs the ball in the air. So he's the easy one to me. To me, that if I could pick one guy to take a step forward, it would be him. No, Jason Knox. Asa Lacy is not that person. Because I don't think it's possible. I mean, if I were to go with a pitcher, honestly, I'd probably go with Daniel Lynch.
That's my guy.
Okay, well, I'll leave that one to you. I think that's
Daniel Lynch is the guy because they do need pitching, and he has a pedigree. And I always come back. I'm a Keith Law fan. Keith Law liked the stuff coming up. He's 6'7". He has velocity. He's left-handed. I mean, come on, what the hell? And it's a guy that I think it's reasonable to think that here's all these tools and talent, and now they're supposed to have a coaching staff that can do things with it. So let's see that connect. And he just couldn't get healthy last year. I know why JJ Picollo said, you mentioned earlier, well, we don't think we're a 106 loss team. Right? Well, they don't because they feel like, well, Brady Singer's not going to have to deal with the World Baseball Classic. So he'll go back to being the Brady Singer from the year before. And Lynch got all screwed up and battled injuries. And Chris Bubich had Tommy John. And they're going to come back and they're going to be what we still think they can be. I mean, I understand how you start to tell yourself the best case scenario is reality. It's not. But Daniel Lynch isn't that far gone, right? Like it shouldn't be this hard for him to be a productive player. That's the guy that I think if he could go back to being a top 100 talent and do it, that's the biggest thing because then they've got a cheap, not even for that long because quietly all those guys have piled up.
They've all used up a lot of service time. Yep.
But, if he could get going, whether it's to flip him or just to actually have a guy in their rotation, I think that's big.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, Lynch is the one guy that, the stuff is still there. You actually talk about command. He actually, he doesn't walk the ballpark. Like it's not about command with him. He probably could miss a few more bats, but I think it's just a matter of health. Like if he was just healthy enough, he has the repertoire. And even this year, I mean, his ERA has gotten a little bit better every year. It's it's still not great. He had a 4.64 ERA this year. But with pitchers, especially lefties, they sometimes take a little bit longer to develop. He's going to be 27. There's still the potential of a little Danny Duffy in him where, he develops a little later and becomes a really good pitcher in his mid to late 20s. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to say. I don't think he can be an ace, but could he be a good number 3 starter if he takes a step forward? Yes. And I think that would be enormous for the Royals. If you have him and Cole Reagans and Brady Singer, okay, you're actually starting to put together the semblance of a decent rotation, and you would have all 3 of those guys under contract for at least 2 more years after this
one. We heard, JJ Picollo say at the end of last year, a bat, a starting pitcher, and weapons in the bullpen. We're still waiting.
Yeah,
that's where it is.
Well, and I'm really worried that they're gonna panic and they're gonna spend resources on the bullpen because they haven't gotten anything else. And yes, the bullpen's terrible, and he made some comments today about the bullpen and that they don't have a closer on the roster. I'm like, you don't go out and get a closer.
That they're rebuilding the bullpen,
right? But stick with that plan. Don't put the resources elsewhere. You know what you put into the bullpen. You put roster spots. You throw darts. That's where when you're a bad team. When you're a good team, no, you don't have the luxury of gambling on your bullpen when you're actually trying to win. But when you're not trying to win, that's when the Royals do some of their best work. I mean, like I said, Joakim Soria or Brad Keller. Sometimes you have a non-roster invitee turn into Ryan Madsen. I mean, there were Mike Minor. I mean, but don't even a Aroldis Chapman, right? I mean, these were the kind of not dart throws in the sense of talent, but guys who you're not sure if they're washed up or if they've lost velocity. But don't spend money. Don't give long-term deals to relievers. Put that money into either a position player or, in this free agent market, we've talked about it, a starting pitcher.
So the winter meetings are off with a whimper, like we said.
They are. We'll see what happens. I would be shocked if the Royals don't make a free agent signing of some import at some point this winter, but we could be waiting around for a while. So hopefully this podcast will be obsolete very quickly, but I fear it may not.
Yeah, this edition of the
this
episode,
not the whole podcast.
Not the whole podcast.
The whole podcast might have been DOA the moment we decided, hey, let's do a podcast about the Kansas City Royals. All right.
We're actually hoping that this podcast will be much more necessary very soon. That things will be going on and we'll be talking about real.
That's why we started it.
That was the hope. That was the hope. We are still hoping. We're proudly brought to you by our friends at GAN Asphalt and Concrete, serving the greater Kansas City area, nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor. Parking lot problems, they're not a problem. GAN's been making them disappear since 1994. Don't risk liability in your parking lot. A brightly striped lot can cut down on that. Let you focus on your business. Also gives a great first impression to clients, to customers as well. GAN Asphalt and Concrete. Find them online at GANasphalt.com. We will continue to watch it. If something big happens, we'll throw together an emergency pod, I suppose, if need be. But otherwise, we'll wrap up what was the Rule 5, where they're going to draft, all those things when we get to our next edition of the Kaufman Corner. So for Rany Jazayerli, I am Soren Petro saying thank you very much for joining us here on Kaufman Corner.